morning to you all, and welcome to yet another thrilling edition of The Other Perspective, a weekly talk show brought to you by ACFIN. The Other Perspective is a space where we interrogate the thing behind the thing that is the thing. My name is Elizabeth Karunji, and I'll be hosting the show today. To all our Muslim brothers and sisters, we hope you had a splendid Eid celebration. And so before we get into today's discussion, kindly subscribe to ACFIN's YouTube channel if you haven't yet, and press the like button down below. You can also share the link with your friends so they can tune in to the discussion. Today, we question the relevance of Labor Day in Uganda. But before we begin this discussion, I want to give you a brief background to this. Uganda, with the rest of the world, commemorated the International Labor Day this Sunday, May the 1st. This day is also known as International Workers' Day, and it is commemorated in appreciation of the contribution of workers to national development. It is also used to raise both national and international consciousness on the importance of promoting and protecting the rights of workers. In Uganda, this year's theme was held under the theme Mitigating the Impact of COVID-19, Enhancing Productive Employment for Improved Livelihoods through the Parish Development Model. Whereas other countries commemorate Labor Day to celebrate milestones achieved, in Uganda it only brings nostalgia about the epidemic of unemployment. Annually, 600,000 graduates are churned out of tertiary institutions, of which only 150,000 can be absorbed within the country's employment sector. This means that only 25% are employed. And on today's panel to discuss this, we have Priska Wanyenya. She is an activist and a journalist covering the Parliament of Uganda, and she is also a regular panelist on the show. Priska, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning to our viewers and listeners.
Thank you, Priska. And on the show, we also have Eddie Kainda, who is no stranger to the show. Eddie is an economist and an educationist. And Eddie, you're most welcome to the show. Eddie, can you hear me? Eddie seems to haven't logged in yet. But Priska, I'll start with you. The Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development, Betty Among, recently revealed that 3 million Ugandans lost jobs in 2 years. That's from 2020 to now. So with all this happening, do you think it's commemorating Labor Day relevant for a country like Uganda, whose unemployment rate in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic is at an all-time high? Is there a relevance in celebrating this day?
Thanks so much, Lisa. And when you talk about the 3 million people that lost their job, even the number alone comes into dispute, because we know of the challenge of the casualization of labor, because most of the people employed do not have contracts in Uganda. So you tend to wonder how they came up about the figure, but it links with the figures that were given by Minister of Finance, I think in around March or Feb 2020, when the pandemic was setting in, because Parliament had asked him to provide a statement on the economic impact that the pandemic is likely, the COVID is likely to have on Uganda. And the loss of employment was one of the things that he hinted about, and even said there were a number of Ugandans who had gotten out of poverty but were going to slip back. And so this figure does not come as shocking, because government predicted it. Although the Minister of Finance had predicted around 2 million, but his statement did not envisage that the pandemic would stretch. None of us envisaged that the pandemic would stretch for this long. So the figures are they're within the rates, but you still know the issue of the casualization of our labor. So one tends to think that the problem could be worse than it's being imagined. And it also brings to question the relevance of the celebrations, because we know We know usually when these celebrations are held, at least these days, they are confined within Kololo or State House, and the people who are invited are a little bit few compared to back in the day when they would host in the. So it kind of limits the what the money that was being spent, but still it's not the money is not in such a low range, and it usually comes as a luck enough that this time around it fell on a Sunday, but we know for sure that each time we have a public holiday, I think URA loses a very about 60 billion every day that the economy is closed through if the what the public holiday. So that brings to question when you look at the money that URA is missing out in revenues. Probably it's the reason as to why some of the people ask the relevance of the celebrations. And also when you look at what happens on a platform when that such a platform is available to the employers, like on such a special day, like for instance, we're discussing with fellow journalists at Parliament as well as the ministry brought a statement on the floor, but we have about I think about 5 workers representatives in Parliament and about 5 youth, something like that. I didn't forget the number. Sorry about that. So they're within that range, but we didn't see any of those even hold a press conference within Parliament to highlight, because usually you use such a platform to highlight what are your pressing issues at the moment, because it's one day in a whole year. That is the only time you're going to come up and raise an issue that you want the whole country to concentrate on. And now you see how the people you're sending to represent you as workers are treating the day, because at least they would address the nation and tell you of their legislative agenda. But I do not know of any labor-related law that is currently before Parliament, or not even any amendment that is being proposed. And because the last one they tried was the minimum wage bill that was returned by the president. So that shows you the laxity of the people who are representing workers. I do not know which unions host these MPs, vote them to office, but it's time they started questioning their relevance, because if you cannot address the nation on such a day, when are you going to do it? So it brings to, and these are the same people who are in Colorado attending the function. You're simply listening to someone who is telling you if the cost of bread is high, you eat cassava. So that is the whole essence of as to why people would question. And the remarks by the president also, because with us the press you can say so many things, but the moment you slip off the rail, that is the question that is going to be highlighted. Now you look at the statement that was made by the president, because he was responding to the commodity prices, but now it overshadowed the whole essence of the what of the day, the labor day that was, because I didn't listen into his speech, but I from the social media reactions and the media, I did not see anything that he said that related to the labor. That overshadowed the whole thing. So that when probably that is the reason why some people would question the relevance of all these celebrations in the country.
Thank you, Priska, for that. And I hope you can we hear you now?
Yes, I can hear you very loud and clear.
Eddie, you seem a bit low. I can't hear you so well. Can you can you speak louder than that?
I, I can hear.
Eddie seems to be off right now. So Priska, I'll get back to you. Eddie, Eddie, I can't hear you. Check if you're muted. Unmute. Eddie seems to be off. Let's hope he gets back on the show. So Priska, you raised something interesting about the workers' representatives in Parliament and how they didn't come out on Labor Day to at least give the nation an address about the status of the labor conditions in the country at the moment. Um, on top of the 3 million jobs that have been lost, that Ugandans have lost, we also saw recently KCCA come out to ban the street vendors from the roads, and the Batembe were chased off, and we saw many of them lose jobs. So, with all this in context, what's the point of having workers' MPs in parliament if they can't come out to talk about these issues?
You also remind me about the issue, because even when the street vendors were chased off the street under the pretext of they are cleaning up the city, which city needs to be cleaned up? Of course, we all agree, but they have to be modality, because these are the people who are losing employment. And like for instance, when you move around, most of the mobile money kiosks were also uplifted during the cleanup exercise. And I remember the CEO of MTN was recently at Parliament, and he said that I think in the month of November or December, they paid out about 70 billion in commissions 1 month to mobile money vendors. You see that? But now these are the people whose kiosks have been swept off the streets. So although you cannot say that all the vendors were within the mobile money vendors are within Kampala, but Kampala Metropolitan employs the huge chunk of them. So you see people, how many people's livelihoods were impacted by them. We all agree that the city needs a bit of organization, but if you're going to do it, provide a backup plan. You see that? Okay, you're going to remove this person, and where are you going to resettle them? And in the first place, it's KCA that is even giving them licenses to do what, to install these kiosks around them. And you have to have someone like a godfather for you to for instance bring a kiosk in front of KC, or in front of a very big building, because you and I, Lisa, know that I cannot, for instance, wake up and say I want to operate a mobile money store within Parliament. You see that you must have a godfather. But so it's already KCA that is licensing them, but is now making a switch on their earlier position, and we are seeing this kind of confusion around the country. And as you raise the issue of the vendors, it's still we were also discussing it, because none of the MPs even bothered to raise it. And we were even having the same conversation with fellow journalists, and we say that back in the day, some of the people who were very eager on raising issues of street vendors were Sebagala and who? This the man who was in Rubaga North, I forget, Moses Kasibanti. They would have raised that day and told them we need a backup plan, but it was business as usual. When those street, but none of the MPs bothered to raise that issue on the floor. It's like I don't know whether they were scared or the street vendors are not their voters, but the mere fact that these people had no backup plan. And when KCA came to discuss that thing, because they were before the Human Rights Committee, their argument was those who had their goods confiscated, can go and claim for them write to the legal department of KCA and claim for their goods at Nakawa. The KCA has a store where they keep some of the confiscated, but you have to have evidence that these items belong to you. So you see, when they made such statements, I looked at them and I asked myself, do they know the nature of business downtown? You see that? And because these are people who are working in these arcades or waiting for goods on the trucks that are being offloaded, and they are buying, for instance, 20 pairs of shoes, or going to a window to buy any water. And I do not know whether they even give them receipts. You see that? But now, for you to reclaim your goods from KCA, you have to go with a receipt. You see that evidence to show us. The only evidence I assume is a receipt, because I don't think you can, every time you buy your merchandise, you take a selfie or photos to keep, that in case it comes out, show them that they are my goods. And when they were still asked about the perishable goods like tomatoes that are picked up, now they also say that for the perishable goods, they are taken to Dungu. I forget the name. They are land mill where they are destroyed. You see that? You're taking somebody's source of income and you're destroying it. It's for all vendors. That is why some activists, human rights activists, tend to think that the regime just simply hates poor people. Because if you're treating the street vendors like that, because these are the poorest of the people.
Thank you, Priska. And Eddie, we're glad to have you back. We hope you're now more clear. Kindly unmute.
Yes, I'm there now. I can hear you very well.
So before you got off, we were talking about the relevance of this Labor Day with Priska, and we had highlighted on the street vendors that were recently moved off the streets, and in addition to that, we also have DGF that was suspended, and very many Ugandans are employed in the civil service sector. So with all that happening in the country, do you think that there's relevance in celebrating this day?
Thank you, Lisa, for your invitation to this conversation. But me, I want to look at this a little bit differently. When the world is celebrating Labor Day, I would not want to look at it from celebrating an event that today is May 1st and we have Labor Day and we're celebrating, the workers are resting. I may want to look at it more from a strategic angle. What are we celebrating? The issues that are hammering our economy today, like the issues of COVID-19, the issues of the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, are recent developments. The issue should be, what have we been doing for the last 30 years, for example, to ensure that a worker in Uganda and somebody employed in Uganda is celebrating achievements in terms of good work conditions, in terms of the net income this person is earning, a take home, or in terms of what returns can I get from my employment, and many other things. But when you look at it from the perspective of the street vendors are being swept off the streets, URA is collecting low revenue compared to what it should have collected, then for me we miss a point. Would want to look at it from the perspectives of how many persons are unemployed in Uganda. For example, when you look at the youth unemployment in Uganda today, it stands at around 75%. Most of the youth do not have jobs. And this did not happen now when we had COVID-19. It was the same case even before we had COVID-19. Would one look at the celebration from the perspective of how many Ugandans, how many young people are getting out of universities? Around 2016, we had about 400,000 university graduates and tertiary institutions. Today, we have about 600 tertiary institutions and university students coming out annually. We are looking at about 10 million, 6 million Ugandans in 10 years. How many of these are employed? We know that government does, the only provision for government offer jobs in Uganda is the public service. How many Ugandans at that age within the public service sector are employed? Or how many Ugandans are creative and innovative to offer jobs, not create jobs in the private sector, given the fact that Uganda's economy is highly liberalized? How many Ugandans are dependent? For example, today the dependence ratio in Uganda is 1:8, meaning that if Priska has a home, on average she has about 8 other Ugandans that are going to depend on what she earns from her workplace. You know, those are the key issues we would be celebrating in terms of indicators and achievements that would be looking at Labor Day as an event that is useful to a Ugandan. If I may give you examples, 40% of Ugandans are outside the money economy, meaning that if you take an example of Kampala alone, a recent study indicates that about 39% of persons that are living in urban centers earn less than 100,000 shillings, according to the Bank of Uganda statistics. But at a more macro level, we're having a huge debt, actually at 53%. Somebody may ask if this money has been borrowed, and the president has always told us that, you know, we are borrowing money, invest in a huge capital investment, including infrastructure, roads, electricity, energy, among and industries. How many jobs have these kind of investments returned in the perspective of how many Ugandans can actively get employed in terms of formal employment, but also in terms of wages? And lastly, when you talk about the onslaught on the civil society, if I may give an example of the democratic governance facility that was financing over 100 civil society organizations and NGOs at national, subnational level. If you cut funding, how much tax have you lost? Remember that the formal employment sector contributes highly. When at the end of the month, I contribute over 30% of my earnings towards Uganda Revenue Authority. So if you cut off the employment that gives you tax, then what are you celebrating? You know, how much tax have you lost? And in the other case, how have you left Ugandans, the eight Ugandans that are fending off me in my employment job, that are dependent on me in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of welfare? You know, when you aggregate all those issues that have been mentioned, it would be a mockery of ourselves to say that we are celebrating Labor Day. For me, I would want to look at it from that perspective. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Eddie, for all that. And let me keep you on. So on Sunday, during the president's speech at Kololo Independence Ground, he said that the parish development model has the potential of solving unemployment in Uganda, and if well implemented, could create up to 50 million jobs. With experience from the previous government projects that we've had a couple of them over the years. Is this achievable? A project of this nature, is it achievable?
You see, I have a friend of mine who always says, Nalizado. But if somebody a lizard on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, on Thursday is not going to turn into a crocodile. The experiences of the previous poverty alleviation schemes do not give us a ray of light that the current poverty eradication scheme in terms of credit from the parish development model would give us a different result. First of all, from experience, the credit approach to development seems to have hit a dead end. And For me, from my own personal experience, government has not established a fertile ground through which the parish women model can work. Already, would have expected government to have unleashed funds into the communities. First of all, to do economic organizing. Secondly, to do financial literacy or financial management training for persons that are going to be given money. Thirdly, to create bankable institutions. But at some one point, I heard the Right Honorable Prime Minister Nabanja mentioning that the intent of the parish development model is to ensure that Ugandans that are within the workforce bracket are going to be given $1 million shillings. Now, the consumptive nature of Ugandans and giving them money, the best of the things they're going to do is to get that money and go to clubs and dance, or go to pork joints, or to go to bars and booze, and that money will be wasted in a way. Now, if you channel credit in institutions that are not bankable, in institutions that do not have a simple business plans, in institutions that are not that are not monitored by the structure of the local governance framework, in institutions where Uganda is rating highest in terms of corruption, in institutions that are captured and cannot perform to the expectations of Ugandans, the president's model of mentioning that 50 million jobs would be created doesn't seem to work. But on the contrary, if those systems worked, remember that Uganda has 9 million households. If you financed a household to be an economic unit and created maybe 3 or 4 micro investments, I would give an example: in goats, in chicken, in crops, but also in dairy production, it would mean that 4 jobs have been created. And if we had a functional system that looks after the parish development model, it means that when you create 4 jobs per home, within the next 1 or 2 or 5 years, you should have succeeded in creating 50 million jobs. Therefore, the president's assumption is that the system will work. The president's assumption that people will create jobs. But when you don't let a system work the way it should have been, then I doubt whether we can get that achievement. Lastly, on the same, the parish development model would have worked to avoid the brain drain that we do have currently in Uganda. If you look at the number of Ugandans that are leaving Uganda to go into enslavement in the Arab world, the number of Ugandans that are leaving Uganda to go to the European Union, to the US and other markets is high. Why? Because we have not cultivated a sense of mindset change to create innovations within our own economy that can reward, can credit, can finance these Ugandans to establish micro or small investments that can keep them actively involved, ensure that they work. A Ugandan, an average Ugandan who is going to the Arab world, is spending not less than 4 million shillings to go to the Arab world in terms of rewards, in terms of air ticket, in terms of allowances, and in terms of money that give to these middlemen. That money is sufficient to create a job that can be used by a person to fend off for the next 1 or 2 years. Therefore, we need to look at these issues from a very broader perspective than the lay perspective of the president of trying to kind of tell us a model, which is a good model, that for me will not work, will not solve the current structural challenge that we do have in the economy. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Eddie. We're going to go in for a short break and we'll be back shortly.
Welcome, my people. A cup of coffee, please. There is tea, everything. Snacks are on the way.
Thanks, but The reason that's why we are here, our people need public health services. We at least need an ambulance at every center.
My sub-county is the forest. We used to depend on the former MP's vehicle, but when he lost his elections, he took away his vehicle.
Of course.
So what does that mean?
Use your budget as a district to procure the ambulances.
If I could, I would. But unfortunately, government operates differently.
What are you saying, Chairperson? This is very serious and urgent.
Yes, I know. And why are they called local leaders then? Local government.
You people, who sent you here?
I know, of course. We are concerned citizens who are watching people dying every day.
We've lost our beloved ones just because of poor health services.
Something has to be done.
You are right. Something has to be done, and very fast.
Yes.
That's transport for you. Go back.
But
All your concerns are taken care of. I will handle.
But
Have a
Chairman,
safe journey.
Thank you so much.
but this man seems to undermine our cause as to why we're here.
No, don't misunderstand me. This is just transport, no strings attached.
Chairman, we came here to discuss and find solution to our problems. But it seems you don't want to engage with us. Let's go and mobilize people, and you will see how serious we are.
Good citizens, let us always hold our leaders accountable. Leadership is a service, not a privilege.
Contribute today at www.politicalfinanceafrica.org/donate. Together, we can contribute towards enhancing democracy as a viable system of governance in Uganda.
Welcome back from that short break, and this is still the other perspective, a space where we interrogate the thing behind the thing that is the thing. And today we're questioning the relevance of Labor Day in Uganda. Before we broke off, we were talking about the president's speech on Sunday, where he talked about the parish development model creating over 50 million jobs for Ugandans. And Priska, I want to move to you. Currently in the country, prices of essential commodities like salt, sugar, and fuel have continued to spiral upwards. And consequently, many workers employed both in the formal and informal sector are struggling to afford the high cost of living. In Kenya, the President Uhuru Kenyatta, during his speech on Labor Day, announced a 12% minimum wage increase for workers, and he also announced subsidies on petrol prices. Back home, here in Uganda, the president took the path of advising Ugandans who cannot afford bread to eat cassava, and I've seen this all over social media since then. What's the take on the contrast between President Kenyatta's speech and Museveni's speech in regard to the above?
I would first of all try to hint on the last submission that Eddie made on the parish development model, because as I was coming here, I read something on the opposition's response on the budget, and they were also raising issues on the preparedness of government to implement the parish development model. And they broke down the figures of the 3.5 million people that the parish development model is targeting, and the vis-a-vis the 1 trillion shillings that has been injected into the parish development model in the coming financial year. And they indicated that the money, it would mean every household would be in position to buy about 24 million coffee seedlings. 24, not 24 million, just 24 seedlings. And they said the money that government is also sending, they will be in position to buy 2 kilograms of maize to plant. That is for the fall financial year. So it would be an interesting report statement that if it was to read because they break down on, because they are showing you how unprepared government is. And of course, there has been the issue of politicizing politicizing all these livelihood programs, and that is why when they come on board, the Ugandans tend to think it's now our time to eat, because, and it's something that we discussed even on this platform, because now there is an attitude that for a long time the people in Kampala have been eating. Now, someone in Kaberamaido or somewhere in Rukunjiri now also says, now it is also my time to eat. And it's going with that attitude. So, and anyway, back to the contrast of the statement. Of course, there have been many remarks that have been said about the contrast in the statement. And it's interesting when you see the debates between the two nations, Uganda and Kenya. On Ugandan side, we think Uhuru is a better leader. On the Kenyan side, they think Museveni is a better leader. They are making mockery of the cassava remark, saying at least they are saying cassava is more expensive in Kenya than the bread. So they are making fun. It's like some kind of escapism. But for the economists like Eddie, they will go deeper into that statement, and they say, well, the president was trying to respond to the commodity prices, and so he talked about the cassava. He only addressed the increase in wheat. What about the biggest elephant in the room is the fuel? It's not something he addressed, and so that is how the economists like Eddie are going to address the issue, and they are looking at the soap and the cooking oil and everything, because you're only looking, okay, you gave us, okay, now we are going to eat cassava. What happens next in the fuel and everything? And now the price of diesel has shot higher than has surpassed the one for petrol, and yet initially it was petrol that people were lamenting about, crying about. So, and when you're contrasting the two nations, Museveni at least gave Ugandans cassava bit, a solution to wheat. But on the other hand, Uhuru told them that he's not the one who started the war in Ukraine, and he's not the one who brought COVID. So why are Kenyans asking him to address the issue of commodity prices? And so on so they are now thinking at least Uganda is better, they have cassava, but then ours didn't even tell us anything. He said he's not in control of anything. So it's it's the contrast between the two nations that I think the only thing that the citizens are left hopeless. So the only thing that they're left with is making jokes about the whole matter, because okay, now whether you cry or you laugh, the commodity prices are here to stay. For I do not know the predictions of the economists, but also their hands are also tied, because now the secretary of the treasury said now they are going to look into issues of government expenditure, travel abroad and meals. They're restricting the special meals for only what? For only the security forces, police, army. I forget the prisons, I think. That is, but for the economists like Eddie have been telling them where most of the wastage goes, and it it's something that government has ignored for all, because Eddie can tell you the money spent on meals is not the biggest issue. Some of the issues that pointed out is the issue of allowances. You see that, and allowances to public servants, because you're going to for instance, those who are going to handle the PDM, you see the chunk of money that is going to go in allowances, monitoring PDM. When you look at the budget of Office of the President and State House, they have about 5 items on monitoring and evaluation. And all these items are going on to what? Or are taking billions of shillings. You see that? And it is the same with the office of the president, office of the prime minister, the OPM. They also have a budget on monitoring and evaluation. So it's this duplication of items that that economists have been telling government that you can do something about it, but they refuse to adhere to it, because now you're looking at recently the Committee on Local Government was recommending a motorcycle for each LOC1. You see that those are about 10 billion shillings. Then they are recommending for parish chiefs all these motorcycles, and yet for economists have thought that it is time the government cut back on the issue, on the sponsoring, on the buying of the fleet. So it's a whole cycle. I do not see any seriousness on government when it comes to the issue of addressing commodity prices, because it's like a song within the East African nations. They're all crying. We are Ukraine, the war, it's a global issue. Ukraine, they are really hopeless. And I can tell you that there's no, as someone who covers Parliament, there's not come any statement on how, even the budget itself has no mention on how to do with commodity prices. It's something that I've looked at, and it's like government is hopeless. It's looking, it has left the whole problem to nature. And I can ably tell Ugandans that they are on their own. They should wait on. I have not, as someone who has access to that information, I've not seen it anywhere. So there is no serious commitment towards addressing the issue of commodity prices, because the only excuse they have is COVID and the Ukraine and Russia war.
Thank you, Priska. Thank you. And I think that I agree with you. I think that the issue Ugandans have is the fact that our leaders will always refer us to an alternative instead of creating solutions for the problems that are at hand. We have had Nabanja tell Ugandans to use the purple leaves if they can't afford soap, and then now we have the president saying this. And yet, within neighboring Kenya, the president has increased the minimum wage, the food subsidies on fuel prices. In Tanzania, I think we did the same with fuel. That's the problem Ugandans have. They're always referring us to an alternative instead of creating a solution. And Eddie, what do you think about that? Priska talked about the budget and the cuts they're trying to make. Do you think that's going to help with the problem we're facing?
Thank you, Lisa. Now, one thing we must notice is that there are very huge structural differences between the Kenyan economy and the Ugandan economy. The Kenyan economy is way higher than the Ugandan economy, and that's why you shall realize that whereas prices are increasing in Kenya, for example, and just like any other parts of the world, the most strategic approach they're looking at is that let us increase the disposable income of Kenyans by making it mandatory that the minimum wage is increased by 12%. Economically, you are improving the disposable income of the person to probably try to afford the higher cost of goods and services as you identify other stringent measures and solutions and austerities to ensure that you reduce prices. But most importantly, in an environment like Uganda or like East Africa, you would be looking at majorly 3 or 4 things. One, a reasonable political economy and its leadership would have been looking at issues of rent as a driver of economic goods and services. People rent where they sleep, but they also rent where they work, right? Two, you'd be looking at issues of food prices. Food prices have averagely increased between 10 to 12%. You'd be looking at issues of essential goods and services like soap, like cooking oil. There's been an increase of about 25 to 30% in that category of goods and services. But mostly the increase in terms of fuel prices that have increased almost about 30%. Therefore, other than being sarcastic, you know, sometimes the president jokes too much. In the context of advising people to eat cassava, he was actually right. He was trying to tell them, look, you must revise your cost centers and try to eat what you can afford. And he did not mention it in terms of giving it a blanket statement as a strategic position, but he was mentioning it in his capacity as not the president in this case, Museveni as a person. Probably Ugandans looked at it from the other perspective, but he was just giving a very simple statement that please try to eat within your means and live within your means, such that as we identify more strategic positions on how we can do it, of how we can control prices. But from a very strategic angle, for me, I think this is when the government would have come up to institute emergency price controls. And this is always done in many cases. I remember sometime when prices of fuel in Kenya were high, government came up to subsidize pump prices, direct pump prices through their cartels, to mention to them that, look, we are reducing the price of fuel by Ugandan shillings, 300 shillings, so that you can sell a liter of fuel at that amount. For me, that was a very good move by the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, by then. Probably in the Ugandan setting, we would be looking at such kind of perspectives in terms of controlling prices of fuel and other very essential commodities that Ugandans are taking. Secondly, would be trying to look at what else in the short run can we do to ensure that the economy rebounds. Now, the short-term interventions in the Uganda's context would be investment in agriculture. Remember that the return cycle in the agriculture sector is between 2 to 3 months, meaning that if you grew vegetables today at the beginning of May, almost at the end of May or beginning of June, you'd be starting to reap either for the market or food security. That is why the parish development model approach would have worked now in the short run, when the immediate need of any Ugandan is food. The focus would have been, how do we revamp the agriculture sector? How do we give credit to to manufacturers? How do we ensure that we subsidize the price of inputs, agricultural inputs? How do we ensure that we create production by giving subsidies, for example, in terms of seedlings to farmers? How do we create market and value addition? How do we guard against counterfeits? I can tell you that one of the biggest misgiving to Uganda's agriculture is counterfeit products. You grow your maize or you grow your beans, you spray it with counterfeit agrochemicals. Within a flash, they die out. In the very short run of about 1 to 4 to 6 months from now, the focus would have been on two things: one, price controls, strategic price controls, but two, trying to ensure that we improve the agriculture sector in terms of the issues I've mentioned. And at a more strategic level, at the macroeconomic perspective, if I can borrow the experience of Kenya, we shall notice that when Moi was president, at the end of his term, the Kenyan economy was one of the worst economies we had in East Africa by then. But remember that when Moi was president, Mwai Kibaki was the Minister of Finance then. You shall recall that Mwai Kibaki is an economist. He studied here in Makerere and got a first-class degree in economics. And he had tried to implement the what he studied at Makerere during Moi's time, but of course, Moi wouldn't listen. At the tail end of his regime, Kenya's economy was at its worst. But what did he do when he became president? Remember that Kenyans even coined a term, what they call Kibaki economics, where Kibaki did at least 6 things that the president of Uganda today should copy. One, he fixed the central bank rates. Remember that it is very difficult at strategic level to control the commercial banking sector. We shall notice that the central bank rate today is at 16%, but the lending rates of commercial banks are oscillating between 25 to 30%. And the Bank of Uganda has left its central bank rate to hover, but the commercial bank rates going out uncontrolled, and the lending rates are very high. And because of the high lending rates, people cannot borrow money for investment. Two, what did he do? He regulated wasteful expenditure. If you look at during COVID time, you remember the president was mentioning that we are going to cut workshops, we are going to cut travels, but people are traveling, people are having workshops and using public resources. You know, people are doing wasteful expenditure. Remember, someone was mentioning that I think it was in the press that they needed about 2.8 billion shillings to teach Ugandans morals to fight corruption. Can corruption be fought using the moralistic approach? Are there any other? What has happened to the persons that have been caught stealing government money, right? Kibaki did widened the tax base. Today, 90% of the taxes that we do have in Uganda are collected in 3 districts: Kampala, Mukono, and Entebbe. It's only 10% of the Ugandan taxes that we collect that come from other parts of the country. Look, how can we say that we are growing the economy, but we are not growing the tax base? There isn't any country in the capitalistic world that has not has evolved without collecting taxes. Other welfare approaches being fixed. Also, we had an issue. Kibaki instituted a situation where institutions worked. Today, we are looking at institutions that are captured. In the current manner in which institutions are captured, you cannot even think of economic gains. You cannot think of economic returns when everything is being done in a mafioso style. The rate of corruption that is existing within these institutions cannot allow the economic perspective of gaining value on what we invest in. How many institutions are efficient? How many institutions have supplied air? How many institutions are controlled by a mere phone call from a higher authority that this should be done the other way? Now,
Eddie, we have less than 5 minutes left. Eddie,
yeah.
We have less than 5 minutes left. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to cut you short.
Yes, and I'm concluding. I'm concluding on this. You know, when you're talking about these economic issues, you are left without anything other than getting irritated by some of the things. But in conclusion, we want to tell Ugandans that the state is absent. The absence of the state means that an average Ugandan has to work within the creativity and innovation that he or she has within, ensure that they salvage themselves. Secondly, the elitist approach within which government poverty alleviation programs are being implemented cannot work unless the persons that are direct beneficiaries are consulted. For me, I think the government poverty alleviation projects cannot work. Thirdly, Ugandans must downscale. The only solution that we do have as Ugandans, and to repeat the statement of the president, is to avoid bread and we eat cassava in the short run, such that as we get higher, we can get back to bread. And more lastly, in economics, that we must reinvigorate. Reinvigoration means that we must re-engineer our economy. We have to make institutions work. We must get people consulted, and we get back our economy. But most importantly, if we downscale the rate of corruption that has not only descended from pandemic levels, but it is scary for a growing economy, an emerging economy that is coming out of COVID-19, like Uganda. I thank you so much.
Thank you, Eddie, for that. And Priska, as you wind up, I just wanted to briefly talk about the 12,000 Ugandans that are reported to leave annually for greener pastures in the Middle East. And this is in response to the confronting unemployment as a challenge. As you wind up, what do you think government can do better to stop the implications of this exodus?
Thank you, Lisa. And I pointed to the need to make the decent jobs and a good environment for Ugandans, to put an end to the casualization of labor and ensure that the working environment within the country is sustainable, because and these are the things we had hoped would be addressed during the International Labour Day celebration, because I'm speaking from a perspective as a woman, because you're looking at incidences whereby women are losing jobs because of getting pregnant. You literally have to choose between motherhood or your career. And we've had cases of women going back to work 3 days after giving birth. And this is someone who has lost one of the body parts, that is a placenta. I don't think if you lost an eye, it would take you 3 months or 3 days to recover. And so we have been making all these perspectives. And when you go to Entebbe Airport, you see at the time I was at the airport around March, there were two groups of girls who, they dressed in their uniforms, and the sight was unbearable. And it was the same instance when I went to Mbale to work on my passport. On the day that I was scheduled for the interview, there was a full course that had brought girls who were coming for those interviews. They were going for the labor companies. And the day that I was going to pick it, there were two costers that had brought girls to. So, and I've told people that who are planning to have families in the near future, that in the near future it will be hard to get a household, because all the girls that we thought that our parents have been using, or some of the people who are currently on the market have been using, they have left. So, and it's not something. It's not something that people are looking at, but it shows you what the future holds. So I think we even need to turn around our education system, and we make sure that instead of some of these subjects that do not make sense to us, we replace them with vocational skills. At least back in the day, we had technical drawing and foods and nutrition, but I was lucky enough, because at least I went to a traditional school that has those labs. But you look at the private schools, how many of them can afford those labs that would give us those traditional skills of, let's say, foods and nutrition. So there is need to turn around our education system also, and we stop relying on the theoretical bit, and we go practical, because that is part of the reason we are going to address the high unemployment in the nation, and try to ensure that the girls who are leaving are saved, because even we are going to have to take some tough structure adjustments. And you remember when the minimum wage bill was tabled, one of the reasons the president did not assent to it is because some investors went to him and told him, when you sign this bill, we shall be forced out of the market, you will lose investors. And he fell for their scheme. But if you're going to turn around the economy, you have to make tough decisions, and the quality, looking at the quality of jobs is one of the tough decisions you have to make, and say you're going to either have to choose between the investors or your citizens as a president.
Thank you, Priska. Thank you, Priska, so much. Thank you, Eddie. It's been an amazing show, very insightful. And if you watch the show today, you can drop down your comments on what you think about that topic today. We hope to see you Wednesday, same place and same time. Bye-bye.